3 in the morning, in a room that never quite gets dark. A man lies on a table under a lamp the color of winter sunlight, and an anesthetist slides a syringe of milky liquid into the line running into his arm. He is asked to count backwards from 10. He reaches 7. Then nothing. Not sleep. Not blackness. Not a gap he can feel the edges of. Nothing at all. And here is the strange part. His brain does not switch off. The monitors keep drawing their restless lines. Cells keep firing. Chemistry keeps moving. The machinery keeps running almost as busily as it did a moment before. The lamp is still lit. The light is simply gone. Welcome. If you find yourself here often, in the small hours, turning things over, you might consider subscribing, so these journeys find you. And if you're the kind of person who senses there's always something more underneath, that the truest parts of a conversation like this one can't quite survive the daylight of a recommendation algorithm, that conversation continues in the quiet room, on Patreon, link in the description. It's for people like us, minds that don't switch off. Tonight we're going to take one assumption apart very slowly, the assumption that you are a container and consciousness is what's kept inside you. We'll follow that idea into surgical theatres, into divided brains, into the octopus and the slime mold, and out the other side. Let's begin with something simple. Where do you think you are? Try it now, gently, without moving, without deciding anything in advance. Point, with your attention only, at the place where you are. Almost everyone lands in the same neighborhood, a few inches back from the eyes, slightly above the ears, a small dark room behind the face, where someone sits and watches the day come in through 2 windows. Nobody taught you this. Children draw it without instruction. It survives every culture, every language, every century, and it feels less like an idea than like a fact you can check by looking. But nothing in your head corresponds to it. There is no room, there is no chair, there is no small dark space behind your eyes where the watching happens. Open a skull and you find tissue, dense and folded and wet, roughly the texture of soft cheese, packed edge to edge. Every cubic millimeter is occupied by something doing something. There is no vacancy, there is no audience seating. The search for that seat has a long and honest history. In the 1600s, René Descartes went looking for it in earnest. He reasoned that whatever unified experience must be a single thing, because experience arrives as one, not as two. Almost every structure in the brain comes in pairs, mirrored left and right. But the pineal gland, a small pale nub near the center, appeared to be alone. So he proposed that the soul touched the body there. One point of contact, a doorway. He was wrong about the pineal gland. It manages melatonin, the chemistry of your own sleep cycle, which may well be doing its quiet work as you listen. But he was not being foolish. He was doing what all of us do instinctively, assuming that because experience feels unified, something unified must be producing it. 4 centuries of looking have not produced that something. Not a region, not a network, not a cell type. Neuroscientists can now watch the brain in extraordinary detail. Activity blooming across areas in fractions of a second, signals racing between distant regions, whole systems lighting up and dimming. What they never find is the place where all of it is delivered to. There is no inbox, there is no desk, which leaves us in an odd position. The most certain thing in your life, the fact that there is something it is like to be you, right now, hearing these words, has no address. We tend to assume that means we haven't looked hard enough, that the seat is hiding somewhere in the folds, waiting for a better instrument. But there's another possibility, and it's the one this whole night is built around. Perhaps the seat isn't hidden. Perhaps we've been searching a container for something that was never *it. Before we can take that seriously, though, we should be fair to the search, because for a while, in the middle of the last century, it looked very much like the seat was about to be found. Montreal, the 1930s. A woman is lying awake on an operating table with the side of her skull removed. This isn't cruelty. The brain has no pain receptors. It cannot feel itself being touched. And the surgeon, Wilder Penfield, needed his patients conscious. He was operating on severe epilepsy, and to remove the damaged tissue safely, he had to know what the surrounding tissue was for. So he used a thin electrode carrying a small current, touched it to the exposed surface, and asked people what happened. What happened was astonishing. Touch here, and a hand rises on its own. The patient watches it go, calmly, and says, "Asterisk, I didn't do that." Asterisk, touch there, and she smells burnt toast in a room where nothing is burning. Touch a spot on the temporal lobe, and she hears a piano, not a memory of a piano, but the sound of it, playing in a room she left 30 years ago, with the particular acoustics of that room, while fully aware she is in Montreal on a table. Penfield mapped the body onto the brain this way, region by region. He found the strip that runs your fingers, the strip that feels them. He found where speech lives, where vision arrives. Here's the reason there are diagrams in textbooks showing a small distorted figure laid across the surface of the cortex with enormous hands and lips. And in thousands of these procedures, across decades, he never once found the person. He could produce an experience. He could not produce an experiencer. Every time he touched something, a patient reported it, which meant that whatever was doing the reporting was somewhere he had not touched yet. And when he had touched everywhere, that somewhere was still not accounted for. There's a detail here that people rarely dwell on, and it's the one that lingers. When Penfield made a patient's arm lift, the patient always knew it wasn't them. The sense of authorship stayed intact even when the action didn't belong to them. He could puppet the body. He could not puppet the sense of being the one to whom the body belongs. Penfield spent his career expecting to find a mechanism that explained the mind. He ended it, in his final book, having quietly changed his mind, writing that the more he studied the brain, the less it seemed to him that the brain alone accounted for the person inside it. He didn't claim to know what the missing element was. He was a careful man, and he offered it as an impression, not a proof. You can disagree with his conclusion. Many neuroscientists do, seriously and for good reasons we'll come to. But it's worth noticing what it cost him to say it. He had spent 40 years with his instruments on the exposed surface of human awareness, more directly than almost anyone in history, and he came away with the sense that something had not been located. The seat is not in the tissue, so perhaps the seat is the whole tissue working together. Perhaps unity comes from the system, not from a spot in it. That's a reasonable move, and there's an experiment that tests it almost perfectly. It involves cutting the brain in half. For a small number of people with epilepsy so severe that nothing else helped, surgeons in the 1960s tried something drastic. They cut the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of roughly 200 million fibers that carries traffic between the left and right hemispheres. The seizures were spreading across that bridge. Remove the bridge, and the storm stays on one side. It worked, and the patients walked out apparently unchanged. They talked, joked, drove, returned to work. For years, nobody noticed anything unusual, which is itself a remarkable fact. You can halve the communication in a human brain, and the person who comes out seems entirely themselves. Then Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga designed a way to speak to each half separately. The trick uses vision. What appears in your left visual field goes to your right hemisphere. The right field goes to the left. Normally, the two halves compare notes instantly. In these patients, they couldn't. So, flash a picture of a spoon to the left field only. Ask the patient what they saw. The left hemisphere, which handles speech in most people, answers honestly, nothing. It genuinely saw nothing. But ask the left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, to reach under a cloth and find the object, and it picks out the spoon without hesitation. Something in that person saw the spoon. That something could not say so. It gets stranger. In one set of experiments, the right hemisphere was shown an instruction, walk, and the patient stood up and started walking, asked why. The speaking half, which had no idea, didn't say I don't know . It said something like, I'm going to get a Coke. It made up a reason, immediately, fluently, with complete confidence. Gazzaniga called this the interpreter, a part of us endlessly narrating why we did what we just did, working from whatever evidence it has, and never signaling when it's guessing. Sit with that for a moment. Not because it's unsettling, because of what it implies about the feeling of being one person. Each half of these patients reported feeling whole, not damaged, not halved, not missing anything, full, complete, a single continuous self, exactly as you feel right now, which means wholeness cannot be evidence of being whole. The seamlessness you're experiencing, the sense that there's one of you, unified, undivided, gathered behind your eyes, is not a report on the underlying structure. It's something the system produces. It survives being cut in two, and it survives on both sides of the cut. So the unity we were going to use as evidence for a single seat turns out to be a made thing. It doesn't prove there's one of you in there. It proves that whatever is in there is very, very good at feeling like one, and made things can be examined, which brings us to the question of when, exactly, this seamless present of yours is assembled, because the answer is later than you'd think. Reach out and touch something near you. Anything. The edge of a blanket, the side of your phone, your own wrist. It happened now. That's the whole report your experience gives you. You decided, you moved, you felt it, and all of it landed in a single seamless instant called asterisk, the present asterisk. That instant is a construction, and it is running behind. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet was measuring something quite specific. He asked volunteers to flex a finger whenever they felt like it. No schedule, no cue, entirely their own choice. He recorded their brain activity, and he asked them to note the exact moment they became aware of deciding. Using a fast-moving clock face, the brain began preparing the movement before the person knew they had chosen. Not by much, a fraction of a second, but consistently. The readiness was building while the deciding, as far as the person could tell, hadn't happened yet. That result has been argued about ever since, and it deserves the argument. Later work suggested that some of what Libet measured may be ordinary background fluctuation, rather than a decision being made in advance. People have questioned whether reading a clock face is a reliable way to timestamp your own mind. It is not the settled proof of anything that it's sometimes presented as, and I'd rather not use it as one, but underneath the controversy sits something far less contested and far stranger. Awareness is slow. Light hits your eye and takes time to become seeing. Pressure meets your fingertip and takes time to become touch. Sound arrives and takes time to become a voice. These times are all different. The signal from your toe has considerably further to travel than the signal from your cheek. By any honest accounting, your experience of a single moment should arrive as a smear, the near parts first, the far parts trailing after. It doesn't. It arrives together, clean, simultaneous, which means someone is waiting. The brain holds the pieces, lets the slow ones catch up, assembles them into one coherent scene, and then delivers the finished thing to you, stamped with a timestamp that says asterisk now asterisk, even though asterisk now asterisk has already gone. There's a related trick with vision. During the fast flicking movements your eyes make several times a second, you should be seeing a blur. You never do. The gap is edited out, and the edges are sewn together, and the sewing is invisible because you're only ever shown the finished cloth. Here's the part I find quietly beautiful rather than disturbing. You have never experienced the present moment, not once in your entire life. Everything you have ever known has been a recently completed edit, delivered to you slightly late, presented as live, and you have never noticed, not because the deception is clever, but because there is nothing to compare it against. There's no earlier version to check it against, no raw feed running alongside, so the seat isn't in the tissue, the unity isn't given, and the moment isn't when it says it is. 3 assumptions gone. There's one more to take apart before the ground is clear. Not asterisk where asterisk you are in time, but where you stop. Where do you end? The obvious answer is skin. Inside the skin, you. Outside, world. A clean boundary, waterproof, portable, unmistakable. Then you notice the edges won't hold still. Consider what's living in you right now. Trillions of bacterial cells, mostly in the gut, in numbers roughly comparable to your own cells. They're not passengers. They help digest what you eat. They influence your immune system. And, this is the part that unsettles people, they participate in chemistry that reaches your brain. The vagus nerve runs like a cable between gut and head, and traffic moves in both directions. Some of your mood, some of your appetite, some of the texture of a given evening involves organisms whose DNA is nothing like yours. Are they you? They weren't there when you were born. You acquired most of them in your first years, and you'll trade some of them for others depending on what you ate this week. Now the other direction. Pick up a stick and probe the ground in the dark, and within a minute or two your sense of touch relocates. You stop feeling the stick against your palm and start feeling the ground at the far tip. Blind people describe this vividly with a cane. The world is felt at the end of it. Drivers report the same thing about the corners of a car they know well. The brain rebuilds its map of the body to include the tool, quietly and quickly, without asking. And it can be fooled in the other direction with almost nothing. In the rubber hand illusion, a person sits with one hand hidden behind a screen and a rubber hand placed where their real hand would look right. Someone strokes both with a brush, in perfect time. Within a minute or two, most people feel the touch asterisk in the rubber hand asterisk. It becomes theirs. And when the experimenter suddenly threatens it, they flinch, a real body defending an object it met 3 minutes ago. None of this is a party trick about gullibility. It's a report on how the boundary is drawn. Your body doesn't come with an edge pre-installed. The edge is calculated, continuously, from patterns of correlation. This moves when I intend. This feels when that touches. And whatever satisfies the pattern gets included, which means the sense of being contained is not a discovery about the world. It's a decision being made inside you, thousands of times a second, and it can be talked out of. Stranger still, even the material inside the boundary is on the move. The atoms in you now are largely not the atoms of a decade ago. You are less like a stone than like a flame, something with a stable shape that persists while the stuff passing through it changes completely. A shape that stays while its contents move is not a container, it's a pattern, and a pattern needs something to be a pattern asterisk in asterisk, which is exactly where our language has been quietly misleading us all night. The word inside. Notice the word we've been leaning on since the first sentence. Consciousness inside the head, the self inside the body, thoughts inside the mind. It's such an ordinary word that it slides past without inspection, and it has been doing an enormous amount of unnoticed work. Now try the same operation on awareness. Open the container, look, and you get exactly what 4 centuries of looking has produced. Tissue, chemistry, activity. All of it real, all of it necessary, none of it the thing you were looking for. Not because the thing is hiding in a fold, but possibly because the question was asking a spatial question about something that may not be a spatial kind of thing at all. Here's a smaller example to steady the idea. Where is the number 7, not the numeral, the ink, the pixels, the sound, the number itself? It's not in a location. It's real enough that bridges depend on it, but asterisk where asterisk is simply not a question it answers. Ask it anyway, and you don't get a wrong answer, you get no answer, and the silence feels like a failure of searching when it's actually a failure of the question. Or take a song. Where is the melody? In the strings? The air? The speaker? The ear? It's in none of them, and it's not nowhere. It's a pattern moving through, and asking which shelf it sits on misunderstands what kind of thing it is. Language does this to us constantly and invisibly. We say the sun rises, and for thousands of years the grammar helped hold a picture of the world in place, the sun going up, the ground staying still. The sentence wasn't the reason people believed it, but it was the shape the belief lived in, and it made the alternative unthinkable rather than merely wrong. Because here's what's actually true, and you can check it yourself without any equipment. You have never encountered a head from the outside except an experience. You have never encountered a brain, a skull, a neuron, a laboratory, or a scan of your own tissue anywhere other than asterisk in asterisk awareness. Every piece of evidence for the container has arrived inside the very thing it was supposed to explain. That's not a proof of anything. Let me be careful. It's a noticing, but it's the kind of noticing that turns a picture around. All night we've been asking how a 3-pound organ produces the light. Perhaps we've had the geometry the wrong way round, and the head is something appearing asterisk in asterisk the light, not the lamp that makes it. That's a large claim, and it deserves to be approached slowly, from the one place where the ordinary explanation genuinely runs out. Let me give you the most ordinary experience I can think of. You're standing at a window in the late afternoon. Someone somewhere is cooking, and the smell of onions and butter reaches you. Outside, the sky has gone that particular color it goes. Not orange exactly, not pink, the one there isn't a word for. Now imagine explaining that to someone who has never had an experience of any kind. Not a person who's never seen a sunset. something that has never had an inside at all. You could describe the wavelengths. You could describe how the atmosphere scatters shorter ones so the longer ones dominate near the horizon. You could describe the molecules rising from the butter, the shape of the receptors in the nose they happen to fit, the cascade of signals that follows. They would understand all of it perfectly, and they would still have no idea what any of it is asterisk like asterisk. This is what the philosopher David Chalmers named, in 1994, the hard problem of consciousness. He drew a line through the whole field. On one side, the easy problems. How does the brain discriminate colors, direct attention, store memories, control behavior, report on its own states? These are called easy not because they're simple, they're the work of thousands of careers, but because we know what an answer would look like. Find the mechanism, show the process. Done. On the other side, one question that doesn't fit the pattern. Why is any of it accompanied by experience? Because in principle it doesn't have to be. Think of everything your body did today without you. Your heart adjusted its rate. Your immune system fought several small battles you'll never hear about. Your pupils resized themselves 100 times. Complex, responsive, intelligent processing, and no felt quality attached to any of it. Nothing it was like. So why is this asterisk different? Why does the processing behind your eyes come with a light on? Here's the sharpest way to feel the gap. Suppose neuroscience finishes. Every circuit mapped, every function explained, every behavior predicted, a complete account with nothing left over. You could read that entire finished book, and it would still not tell you why reading it feels like anything. The functions would all be accounted for. The litness would not appear anywhere in the accounting. Not because we're missing a chapter, because of what kind of thing an explanation is. Explanation works by describing structure and process. This connects to this, which causes that, and structure and process always describe things from the outside. Experience is the one thing in the universe that has an inside, and the outside description never reaches it, no matter how detailed it gets. The philosopher Joseph Levine called this the explanatory gap. Not a gap in our data, a gap in the kind of thing data can be. Plenty of serious thinkers push back, and they're not being careless. Daniel Dennett spent a career arguing that the hard problem is an illusion generated by how we think about ourselves, that once you explain every function, including the function of insisting something's left over, there is nothing further to explain. That view is held by clever people, and it may be right. But notice what's happened even while we argue about it. We started the night assuming consciousness was a thing inside a container, waiting to be located, and we've arrived somewhere else, at a question so unlike every other question in science, that the disagreement isn't over the answer, it's over whether the question is real. That's usually a sign that a background assumption is bearing more weight than anyone noticed. Before we touch it though, one more look at what the instruments can actually do, because they can do something extraordinary, and the way they do it is the clue. There's a question that used to be nearly unanswerable, and it kept doctors awake. Someone is lying in a hospital bed after a severe brain injury, eyes open, sometimes, no response to their name, no squeeze of a hand, no sign of anything at all. Is there someone in there? For most of medical history, you guessed. You watched for behavior, and if there was no behavior, you assumed no one was home, which works, unless the person is present and simply cannot move a muscle to say so. In the last 2 decades, a method emerged that gets at it differently. It's called the Perturbational Complexity Index, and the idea behind it is almost musical. You send a brief magnetic pulse into the skull, painless, harmless, a small tap of energy into the cortex, and you record with electrodes how the brain responds, not whether it responds. Asterisk how. Asterisk in deep sleep, or under anesthesia, or in a truly unresponsive brain, the pulse produces something simple, a big local wave that spreads a little, fades, and stops, like knocking on a wall, loud, dull, over. In a conscious brain, the same pulse produces something else entirely. The response travels, splits, loops between regions, comes back changed, sets off patterns in places far from where you knocked. A complicated, non-repeating conversation that goes on for a few hundred milliseconds, like striking a bell in a room with strange acoustics and hearing the room answer. You can put a number on that difference, roughly, how compressible the response is, how much of it is genuine complexity rather than repetition, and that number sorts conscious from unconscious brains with remarkable reliability. It works across ordinary sleep, across different anesthetics with completely different chemistry, across brain injury. In some cases, it has flagged complexity in patients who showed no behavior whatsoever, people who, on the outside, appeared entirely absent. That is a genuinely wonderful thing. It has changed conversations at bedsides. It matters. Now sit with what it is actually measuring. It measures how a physical system echoes. It tells you the shape of the room. And the discovery, quietly, is that a room with a lit lamp in it has different acoustics from a room without one. That's a correlation, and a strong one, but the pulse never touches the experience. It touches the tissue, and the tissue answers, and from the answer we infer that somebody is present, the same way you infer someone's home from the light in an upstairs window. Confidently, usefully, indirectly, always from the street, and notice what this shares with everything else in the night so far. Penfield's electrode, outside, the split brain screen, outside, the scan, the pulse, the index, outside. Every instrument humanity has ever built takes its readings from the outside of the thing it studies, because that is what an instrument is for, which leaves exactly one thing in the universe you have never accessed from the outside. You are inside it right now. It's the only interior you've ever visited. Everything else, every object, every person, every measurement, every result I've just described, you know about because it appeared asterisk in their asterisk. We keep trying to find that interior by studying exteriors. Perhaps it can't be found that way, not because it's hidden, but because it isn't that kind of thing. Which brings us to the turn. Here it is. The whole night has been walking toward this, and I want to say it plainly before we soften it. The usual picture. The universe exists, mostly dark and mostly empty, made of matter obeying laws. In one small corner, some of that matter arranged itself into brains, and inside those brains, somehow, a light came on. Consciousness appears asterisk in asterisk the world, the inversion. Everything you have ever encountered, every object, every star, every brain, including the idea of a universe that existed before minds, has appeared asterisk in asterisk experience. Not one exception, not one item in your entire life has ever reached you from outside it. Some thinkers take that seriously and propose that experience isn't a late arrival in the world. It may be the field in which the world appears. You are not a container holding a small light. You are something happening in a light that was already on. Stay with me, because the first reaction is usually a specific objection, and it's a good one. Asterisk. Surely the universe was here before anyone was around to see it. Surely the mountain exists when nobody's looking. The proposal doesn't deny that. It isn't the claim that your personal mind makes the moon. That would be absurd. You can't wish the moon away, and neither can I. What's proposed is subtler, that the fundamental fabric of reality may have an experiential character running all the way through, and that a brain doesn't asterisk create asterisk awareness so much as shape it, focus it, narrow it into the particular view we call being a person. An analogy that helps, imperfectly. A whirlpool doesn't create water, it's a shape water takes, a pattern in a medium that was already there, with a boundary that looks solid from a distance, and turns out to be nothing but the medium moving. Take the whirlpool apart, and you don't find a whirlpool substance inside, you find water. On this view, a person is a whirlpool, not a container of consciousness, a asterisk shape asterisk of it. And notice what that would explain, gracefully, without any extra machinery. It explains why the seat was never found. You don't find a whirlpool's core by draining the river. It explains why unity survives cutting the brain in half. The medium doesn't have halves. It explains why every instrument reads from the outside and comes back with correlations instead of the thing itself. It also explains the hard problem, or rather dissolves it. The hard problem asks how you get experience out of things with no experience in them. If that's genuinely the situation, the question may have no answer because you cannot pull a quality out of ingredients that don't contain it. But if experience is in the fabric rather than assembled from parts that lack it, then the question changes shape. Not asterisk, how does the light get made asterisk, but asterisk, how does the light get narrowed into this particular view? Now the honesty. This is not proven. It is not the standard position. Most working neuroscientists don't hold it, and they have real reasons that we'll give proper time to shortly. It has its own serious difficulties, genuinely hard ones, and we'll face those too, rather than skate past them, and there's a limit worth marking clearly. Even if this frame is right, it describes asterisk how asterisk things might be arranged. It says nothing about why there is anything at all, or what set it in motion, or what any of it is ultimately for. Those questions sit outside every instrument, and outside this one too. Whatever you already believe about them, nothing here reaches up to touch it. What the frame does offer, tonight, is a different place to stand. You have spent your life assuming you're a small lit thing in a vast dark universe. Here's the other arrangement. The darkness is not the container. The light is, and you are not holding it. You are a place where it has thinned into a shape, briefly, and taken the form of someone lying in a room, listening. That thought is much older than the argument for it, which is where we go next. If this idea were new, it would be easier to dismiss. Novelty is cheap, and the internet manufactures it hourly, but turn over almost any old tradition of careful thought, and you find someone who got here first, usually by a different road. In India, more than 2,500 years ago, thinkers working on the Upanishads arrived at a formulation that has never entirely lost its force, that the awareness at the center of a person and the ground of everything are not two separate things. It wasn't offered as mysticism for its own sake. It came out of a rigorous method. Sit down, look for the observer, keep looking, notice what you never managed to find, and take the failure seriously. In China, the Taoist writers approached it as flow rather than substance, describing a person as a temporary shape in something continuous, and gently mocking the confidence with which we assume we know which side of the boundary we're on. In 18th century Ireland, George Berkeley worked it out from pure logic and got laughed at for it. His argument was blunt. Everything you know about matter, you know through perception, color, sound, weight, resistance, all of it perceived. Strip perception away and describe what's left without using a single perceptual quality. Try it. Berkeley's claim was that you can't, because there's nothing there to describe. Samuel Johnson famously kicked a stone and said he'd refuted him, which was a good joke and not an argument. Berkeley never said stones don't hurt. He said the hurting is also perception. In Germany, Kant made the tidier version. Whatever reality is in itself, we never meet it directly. We meet it filtered through structures that shape everything that reaches us. Space, time, causation. He suspected these might be features of the viewing rather than features of the viewed. He didn't claim to know what lay beyond the filter. He claimed to know that we'd never step outside it to check. Then, unexpectedly, physics got uncomfortable in a related direction. I want to be careful here, because this is where popular accounts go badly wrong. When quantum physicists discovered that certain outcomes appear settled only upon measurement, some of them, Wolfgang Pauli, Erwin Schrödinger, and others, began wondering aloud whether the observer had a role that hadn't been accounted for. Schrödinger in particular read Indian philosophy closely and wrote about consciousness as singular rather than plural. But this is not physics proving mysticism. It isn't proving anything of the kind. Most physicists today interpret measurement in ways that require no consciousness at all, and the interpretive debate is unresolved and often bad-tempered. What's fair to say is only this. At the foundations of the most successful theory we have, there's a genuine open question about the role of the observer that has resisted 100 years of argument. So, ancient contemplatives, an Irish bishop, a German philosopher, and several founders of quantum theory circled the same odd suspicion from completely unrelated directions and with no way of borrowing from each other. That's not proof. Old ideas are not true because they're old, and convergence can be an artifact of how minds work rather than how the world is. But it does mean something. It means this isn't a stray thought produced by one restless night. It's a suspicion that keeps recurring in careful people who look closely at the same place, and each time it's been buried, something eventually digs it back up. Which raises a practical question. If it were true, what would actually change in the morning? Suppose it's true. Not proven, supposed, the way you might try a room's furniture in a different arrangement before committing. The first thing that shifts is the sense of manufacture. Right now you probably feel like the author of your thoughts. They seem to come from you, made by you, issued from somewhere behind your face. But watch them for 2 minutes and something odd shows up. You never see one being built. There's no assembly. A thought is simply asterisk there, asterisk. Complete, already in words, and then it's replaced by another one you also didn't construct. Try to predict your next thought. You can't. If you could, the predicting would already be it. This is not a strange claim requiring any philosophy. It's a description of what happens, available to anyone who looks. Thoughts arrive. Under the container picture that's slightly embarrassing, you're supposed to be the one making them. Under the inversion it's unremarkable. Weather arrives in a valley. The valley doesn't manufacture it. The valley is the shape the weather moves through. The second shift is what happens to effort. There's a specific exhaustion that comes from feeling like you're generating everything, holding the world up, keeping your own awareness running, managing the light from inside. Many people who lie awake at night know this feeling intimately. It has the texture of maintaining something. But notice, you've never once had to keep awareness going. You don't switch it on in the morning. You've never done the work of being conscious. It's simply the situation you find yourself already inside every time you check. The exhaustion isn't from holding the light, it's from believing you have to. Third, and gently, something changes about other people. Under the container picture, everyone is sealed. Billions of private boxes, each with a light inside, and between them only signals, words, expressions, the endless imperfect business of trying to transmit an interior across a gap. Loneliness is the default condition, and connection is a technical achievement. Under the inversion, the gap is a shape in something continuous. The medium isn't divided, the whirlpools are, which means the separateness is real at the level where you live and provisional at the level underneath it, and that's a very different kind of alone. Now, a caution, because this idea can be misused. None of this means nothing matters, or that other people are figments, or that pain is unreal. Whirlpools are real. Being one hurts sometimes. If you drop something on your foot tonight, the metaphysics will not help. The frame doesn't dissolve your life, it redescribes where your life is happening, and it isn't a therapy. I'd be uneasy offering it as one. It's a possibility, held loosely, tried on for the length of a night, but here's the small thing it can do, right now, in the dark. If awareness isn't something you produce, then it isn't something you can run out of, and it isn't waiting on your permission. It was here before you started listening, and it doesn't require your attention to continue. Which means, among other things, that you can stop holding it. That's the frame at its warmest. Now the cold water, because an idea this comfortable deserves the hardest questions we have. I've spent several sections making a case. Let me now do my best to take it apart, because you deserve the other side properly argued, rather than gestured at. The first objection is the strongest, and it's about evidence. If consciousness were fundamental and brains merely shaped it, why does damaging the brain change the mind so precisely? And it does, with a specificity that is genuinely hard for the inversion to accommodate. Damage a particular region, and a person loses the ability to recognize faces, including their own, while seeing perfectly well. Damage another, and language goes while comprehension stays. Alcohol changes personality. A tumor in the wrong place has, in documented cases, altered someone's moral behavior, and its removal has restored it. Anesthesia doesn't dim experience gently, it removes it. If mind were merely being received by the brain, the way a radio receives a signal, you'd expect damage to produce static, degradation, noise, a weaker version of the whole. Instead you get clean, targeted, surgical subtraction. Specific capacities vanish while others sit untouched. The reply is that the brain is a very complicated filter, and complicated filters fail in complicated ways. That reply is not nothing, but it's noticeably less impressive than the evidence it's answering, and honest people should say so. The second objection is about testability. What experiment could distinguish a universe where experience is fundamental from one where it emerges from complexity? If both predict identical observations, and so far they do, then the difference may be a difference in framing rather than in fact. Science has been burned before by claims that explain everything and forbid nothing. The third is the one we'll spend real time on later. If experience is the fabric, why does it arrive in unified, bounded selves rather than an undifferentiated fog? Why is there a asterisk, you asterisk at all? That question has no good answer yet, and the people who hold this view know it. Against all that, the standard scientific position is doing well, enormously well. It has produced the anesthetics that make surgery possible, the treatments that pull people back from depression, the maps that let surgeons cut safely. Consciousness as emergent has been an extraordinarily productive assumption, and it may simply turn out to be right, with the hard problem dissolving the way what is the vital force in living things dissolved once biochemistry filled in. So where does that leave us, at whatever hour this is? With two frames. One is standard, productive, and has a question at its center it cannot currently reach. The other reaches that question elegantly and struggles with things the first handles easily. Neither is finished, and I don't think tonight is the night either gets resolved. But there's something worth noticing about the shape of the disagreement, and it's the last thing I want to leave in Chapter 3. Both frames agree completely on this. The light is on. Whatever produced it, however it's arranged, there is something it is like to be here, right now, in this room, hearing this. That fact is not in dispute anywhere. It's the most certain thing any of us has, more certain than the existence of the room, more certain than the existence of the speaker. And it's the one thing no instrument has ever managed to point at. Everything from here deepens that, from stranger angles. We've spent this long assuming that whatever awareness is, it looks something like ours. There's very little reason to think so. An aquarium in Germany, after closing, a staff member arrives in the morning to find a burnt-out floodlight and puddles on the floor. It happens again. Eventually they keep a night watch and discover the culprit, an octopus, climbing to the rim of its tank and squirting a precise jet of water at the light, apparently because it didn't like it. Octopus stories are everywhere, and most of them are true. They open jars. They escape through gaps barely wider than an eye. They recognize individual keepers and have been observed soaking the ones they've taken against. One in New Zealand reportedly made repeated night visits to a neighboring tank to eat the fish, returning before staff arrived. That's clever. What's genuinely strange is the architecture doing it. An octopus has around 500 million neurons, comparable to a dog, but most of them aren't in its head. Roughly 2/3 sit in the arms. Each arm carries a substantial nervous system of its own, capable of solving problems locally. Detached arms have been observed reaching, grasping, passing food toward where a mouth would be, for a while after separation. The central brain doesn't seem to micromanage them. It appears to issue something more like intent. Asterisk, go there, get that asterisk, and the arm works out the route itself, feeling its way, tasting the surface as it goes, since octopus suckers taste what they touch. So try to hold the question honestly. Is that one experiencer or 9? Whatever the answer, the octopus itself gives no sign of feeling divided. It hunts as a unit. It behaves as one animal, which should sound familiar because we've been here before tonight. A split-brain patient also felt whole. Whatever produces the sense of being one thing does not require being one thing. And here's the detail that lands hardest, for me. Octopuses are colorblind. The evidence is fairly clear. They have a single type of photoreceptor, which should mean no color vision at all. They are also among the most spectacular color changers in the ocean, matching backgrounds they cannot, by any conventional account, see. There's a hypothesis, not settled, that they sense color through their skin, light-sensitive proteins distributed across the body, letting them detect something like hue with their surface rather than their eyes. Imagine what that is like. Don't reach for a picture, because there isn't one. Seeing with your skin, tasting with your arms, and having part of your thinking happen out at the ends of you, several feet from anything you'd call a head. There is almost certainly something it is like to be that, and we have no access to it whatsoever. Not because we lack the technology, because the only interior any of us has ever entered is our own. We split from octopuses more than 500 million years ago, before anything resembling a brain existed on either branch. Complex awareness appears to have been invented twice, independently, in two utterly different designs, which raises a quiet question. If it happened twice, in forms this unlike each other, how confident should we be about where else it might be, or about the assumption that it needs a brain at all? There's an organism that puts real pressure on that assumption. It has no neurons whatsoever. Meet something with no brain, no neurons, no nervous system of any kind, and no organs. A single cell, though it can spread across a dinner plate, bright yellow and slightly repulsive if you find it on damp wood. Its name is Physarum polycephalum slime mold. In 2010, a team of Japanese researchers led by Toshiyuki Nakagaki did something playful with it. They took a map of the area around Tokyo and placed oat flakes, slime mold food, at the positions of the major surrounding cities. Then they put the organism down on Tokyo itself and left it to grow. At first it spread everywhere, an undirected yellow film, exploring in all directions with no strategy at all. Then it began to edit. Tubes that led somewhere useful thickened, tubes that led nowhere thinned and vanished. Over about a day, the sprawl resolved into a network of connections between the food sources. That network was strikingly similar to the actual Tokyo rail system, a system designed over decades by engineers with budgets, surveys, and committees. On the measures the researchers used, the slime mold's version was comparable in efficiency, and in some respects more resilient to a connection being cut. It has no neurons. It has nothing that could hold a map. It has never seen Tokyo. What it has is a rule and a body. Where things are good, reinforce. Where things are poor, withdraw. Run that everywhere at once, in a body that is all one continuous cell, and the solution emerges from the shape of the searching, rather than from any decision made anywhere. There's more. Slime molds can be trained to anticipate. Expose them to a mild cold snap at regular intervals, and they begin slowing in advance of the next one, and they keep doing it for a while, after the cold stops coming. Something in them has registered a rhythm and expects it. That is a kind of memory in an organism with nothing to store it in, and researchers think the storage may be in the physical structure of the tubes themselves, the body remembering by being reshaped. Now, the necessary caution, because this is where the internet oversells everything. None of this shows a slime mold is conscious. There's no evidence of that, and I'm not making the claim. It may be a beautiful mechanism with no one inside, and that remains the most reasonable reading, but look at what it does to the categories. We tend to assume a ladder, matter at the bottom, then life, then nervous systems, then intelligence, then finally, at the top, experience. Each level requiring the one below. The slime mold sits somewhere the ladder didn't allow for. Problem solving without a brain, memory without storage, anticipation without a model, behavior that looks intelligent from every angle except the anatomical one. And that should make us less confident, not more. Because our reason for believing that experience requires a brain is largely that we have one, and we're the only case we've ever examined from the inside. That's a sample of one, generalized to a universe. If intelligence-like behavior can appear in something with no neurons at all, then the physical arrangements that might matter here could be far broader than the ones we happen to have, which takes us somewhere stranger still, to the possibility that information about form and purpose is being carried by living tissue in a language that isn't nervous at all. Cut a flatworm in half, and it doesn't die. Each half regrows what's missing. The head end grows a tail. The tail end grows a head. A new brain, complete, in a few days. Planarians have been the workhorse of regeneration research for over a century, but the question that turns strange is simple. How does the tail piece know it needs a head? The cells at the wound don't have access to a plan. There's no architect. And yet the outcome is precise. One head, correct orientation, correct number. Michael Levin's laboratory at Tufts spent years on this and found that a substantial part of the answer isn't chemical in the way biology usually means. It's electrical. Every cell in your body holds a voltage across its membrane, a small charge difference, like a tiny battery. This isn't unique to nerves. Skin cells, liver cells, all of them. And across a tissue, These voltages form patterns. Levin's group found evidence that these patterns carry information about what shape the tissue is supposed to become. Here's what makes it more than a technicality. By manipulating those voltages, without touching a single gene, his team could get a planarian tail fragment to grow a head belonging to a different species of flatworm. The genome was unchanged. The instructions in the DNA were identical. What changed was the electrical pattern, and the body built to the pattern rather than to the letter of the genome. They also produced worms with two heads, and when those two-headed worms were later cut again, in plain water, some of them regenerated as two-headed once more, the altered pattern persisting through generations of cutting, without any genetic change at all. Levin describes this, carefully, as a kind of memory held in the electrical state of the tissue, not memory of an event, memory of a target, of what the body is aiming at. The frog work is stranger still. Tadpoles with eyes surgically placed on their tails have, in some experiments, shown evidence of visual response, the nervous system apparently working out how to use a sensor in a place no ancestor ever had one. Now the careful part again. Levin is a working scientist, and he doesn't claim any of this is consciousness. He uses phrases like basal cognition goal-directed behavior at levels far below anything with a mind, and he's explicit that the language is functional, not metaphysical, but hold it next to everything else tonight. The seat was never found. Unity survives being cut in half. An octopus thinks with its arms. A single cell without neurons solves a transport network. And now, your cells appear to be exchanging something like information about purpose, in an electrical language, in tissue that has nothing to do with thinking. The picture where mind is a special substance that appears only at the top of a ladder is looking less and less like the picture the evidence supports. Something more like organization with an inside seems to run further down than we assumed. How far, nobody knows. Whether it goes all the way down, whether there's something it's like to be a cell or a tissue holding its shape in the dark, is exactly the kind of question no instrument can settle. And that limit isn't a temporary inconvenience. It's permanent, and it has a name. In 1974, Thomas Nagel published a short paper with a question for a title. What is it like to be a bat? It is probably the most quietly devastating thing written about consciousness in the last century, and it takes about 20 minutes to read. He picked the bat deliberately. Not an alien, not a machine, a mammal. Warm-blooded, related to us, with a brain built from the same materials on the same basic plan. Close enough that there's no serious doubt something is going on in there, and yet a bat lives by echolocation. It sends out cries above the range of your hearing, and builds its world from the returns, knowing the distance, size, texture and motion of things in complete darkness, at speed, accurately enough to catch an insect in flight. Now try to imagine what that's like. You'll find yourself doing something specific. You'll imagine being a person with a bat's abilities, hanging upside down, hearing shapes, which is not the question. The question is what it's like for the bat to be a bat, not what it would be like for you to be one, and that door is closed. Not partly, entirely. We know almost everything about how it works, the frequencies, the timing, the neural circuits that compute delay into distance. That knowledge is real and hard-won, and it doesn't get us 1 inch inside. Nagel's point wasn't about bats. It was about what kind of thing an objective description is. Science works by removing the particular point of view. That's its power. A measurement is valuable precisely because it's the same for everyone, but consciousness is made of point of view. It's the one phenomenon whose entire nature is being from somewhere. So the method that makes science work is the method that guarantees it will never arrive at this, which means every mind you have ever encountered, you have inferred. Think about that for a moment, because it's the loneliest true fact I know. You have never verified that anyone else is conscious, not your partner, not your children, not anyone. You assume it, instantly, warmly, universally, from behavior and similarity in the look in someone's face. And the assumption is almost certainly correct. But you have never once checked. You cannot. There is exactly one interior in the universe you have ever been inside, and it's this one. Now turn that around and something softens. Everyone you have ever met has been in the same position. They've inferred you too. Every act of understanding between two people has been a reaching across a gap that no one has ever crossed, and no one has ever failed at either. Nagel didn't offer this as despair, and I don't either. He offered it as a limit worth knowing, because a limit that's understood stops feeling like a failure. And there's one more thing his question does, which is why it belongs here. Once you accept you can never get inside a bat, you lose your grounds for confidently saying what doesn't have an inside. We've been drawing that line for a very long time, and we have moved it over and over in only one direction. There's a history nobody teaches as a single story, and it's worth telling as one. In the 17th century, Descartes proposed that animals were machines, not metaphorically, literally, clockwork. Their cries when injured were the sound of mechanism, no more meaningful than a hinge. Some of his followers demonstrated this at dinner parties, and I won't describe it, because the point isn't the cruelty. The point is that these were intelligent, educated people who believed, sincerely, that they were the only lit windows in creation. Move forward. Through much of the 20th century, it was standard medical practice to perform surgery on human infants without anesthesia. The reasoning was that their nervous systems were too immature to feel pain properly, and that their crying was reflex. This continued into the 1980s. It changed because researchers demonstrated, with hormonal stress measurements and outcome data, that the babies were plainly experiencing what was happening to them. Fish were held not to feel pain, only nociception, damage detection without suffering. Then studies showed they seek out analgesics when injured, and make trade-offs that look like weighing discomfort against reward. The consensus moved. Crustaceans were confidently outside the line. In 2021, a review commissioned by the UK government concluded there was reasonable evidence of sentience in decapods and cephalopods, and the law was amended to include them. Insects were beyond question. Recent work on bees has shown behavior that some researchers describe as play, rolling small wooden balls with no reward attached, more often when young, apparently for its own sake. Every one of those revisions went the same way. Not once in the entire history of this question have we discovered that something we thought had an inner life turned out not to. The correction only ever runs outward. That's a striking asymmetry, and it's worth asking why. Partly the science improves, but partly, and less comfortably, the line has always been drawn where it's convenient. We eat what falls outside it. We experiment on what falls outside it. Whether something feels is not a neutral question when the answer has costs, and the historical record suggests we've been systematically generous to ourselves. There's also something simpler at work, and gentler. Similarity. We grant inner life most readily to things with faces, eyes, expressions that map onto ours. We're moved by an animal that looks back. It's much harder with an octopus, harder still with an insect, nearly impossible with a slime mold or a tissue holding an electrical pattern in the dark. That's not a measurement, it's a resemblance detector, and it was built for recognizing each other, not for surveying the universe. So here's where the chapter settles, without resolving. We have a long record of being wrong in one direction. We have a permanent limit, courtesy of Nagel, on ever checking directly, and we have a growing collection of things, divided brains, distributed arms, brainless problem solvers, electrical body memory, that don't fit the ladder we inherited. None of that proves the inversion, but it does something to the confidence of the alternative. The idea that awareness is a rare local product, manufactured in one kind of tissue on one planet, is starting to look less like a finding and more like the last position of a line that has never once held. And if the line keeps moving outward, it's fair to ask what it's moving through asterisk. Before that, though, something closer to home. Because we've been talking about other minds and their strange worlds, and the strangest world available to you tonight is the one currently arriving behind your eyes. Look at whatever's in front of you. It seems obvious what's happening. There's a room, and light is bouncing off it, and your eyes are collecting that light, and you're seeing what's there. A window with a view, reception. Almost none of that is right. Start with the anatomy. Signals leave your eyes and head for the visual parts of your brain. Signals also come back the other way, from the brain toward the incoming stream. If you count the connections, the backward traffic substantially outnumbers the forward. In some measurements, the incoming information is a minority of what's arriving at the point where seeing happens. That is not what a camera looks like. In a camera, everything flows one way. The model that makes sense of this is called predictive processing, and it turns seeing inside out. On this account, your brain isn't waiting to be told what's out there. It's constantly generating a guess, a full, detailed, moving prediction of what should be arriving, and using the actual signals mainly to correct it. You are not seeing the world, you are seeing your brain's best guess, edited by the parts of the world that disagreed with it. Here's why that isn't as alarming as it sounds. The correction is relentless. Every mismatch gets flagged, and flagged mismatches update the guess. The result is a model that agrees with reality, often enough to keep you alive, which is a demanding standard. Trip on one real staircase, and the model is falsified in a way you feel immediately. But it explains a great deal that the camera picture can't. It explains why you have a blind spot in each eye, where the optic nerve leaves, and never notice it. The guess simply fills it in with whatever's around it, seamlessly, and you have gone your whole life without seeing a hole. It explains why you don't see the blur when your eyes flick. The guess doesn't flick. It explains why the same grey square looks light or dark depending on what surrounds it, and why the dress was blue and black to some people, and white and gold to others. Nobody was malfunctioning. Two guesses about the lighting produced two different worlds from one photograph, and it explains something more intimate. When you feel hungry, or anxious, or suddenly certain that a room is unfriendly, those are predictions too. The same machinery that guesses about surfaces guesses about the state of your own body and delivers the guess as feeling. Anil Seth, who has done as much as anyone to popularize this, uses a phrase for it: a controlled hallucination. Hallucination because it's generated from within, controlled because reality keeps pulling on the reins. The wow, if there is one, isn't that you're deceived. It's the reframing of what a hallucination is. The difference between ordinary perception and a hallucination isn't that one is generated and one isn't. Both are generated. The difference is whether the generating is still being corrected, which puts us in a curious position. Everything from the first chapter, the surgical theatre, the electrode, the split brain, the slime mold, arrived to you inside a construction, built by the very thing under discussion. And once you accept that the seeing is made, an obvious question follows about what it's made *of*, because some of the most vivid parts of your world turn out to have no counterpart out there at all. Think of the most saturated red you've ever seen. Not a photograph of it. The thing itself, a poppy in full sun, a brake light in rain. That red is not out there. Nothing in the world is red. What's out there is electromagnetic radiation with a wavelength around 700 nanometers. That's a distance, a measurement of how far apart the peaks of a wave are. It has no color, any more than a ruler has a color by being long. Somewhere between that wave arriving and you having the experience, redness happened, and redness exists nowhere in the physical description. Do it with sound and it's the same. Out there, pressure moving through air, compressions and rarefactions, molecules crowding and spreading, no music. A wave doesn't have a tune. Somewhere between the air and you, that vibration became a cello, with all the ache a cello has. Smell. Molecules of certain shapes fitting certain receptors. There is no scent in a molecule. The smell of rain on hot pavement, or a person's neck, or a house you lived in as a child, none of that is in the chemistry. It's added. Here's how to make it vivid. Mantis shrimp have far more types of color receptor than we do. Many birds see into the ultraviolet, which means flowers we find plain are marked with patterns invisible to us. Landing lights we've never seen, on plants in our own gardens. Those patterns are physically present right now, in daylight, everywhere, reflecting, and they don't exist in your world at all, and never have. Which means the vividness of your world is not a measure of how much is out there. It's a measure of what you were built to render. Galileo saw this in the 1600s, and it caused the whole problem we've been circling all night. He argued that the real properties of things were the ones you could measure: size, shape, motion, number, and the rest. The colors and tastes and smells existed only in the perceiving creature. It was a brilliant move, and modern physics is built on it. But look what it did. It cleaned the mind out of the world, so the world could be measured. and it swept everything it removed into one place, the mind, which then had to be explained by a science whose founding move was to exclude exactly that. The hard problem isn't an accident. It was built into the foundations on purpose, 400 years ago, for a very good reason. So sit with the arrangement as it stands. The world, described physically, is silent, colorless, tasteless, odorless, wavelengths and pressures and shapes, in the dark. Everything else, every color you've loved, every voice you'd recognize, the entire texture of being alive, is on the other side, in the rendering. And the rendering isn't a small extra room off the side of the universe. It's where you've spent every moment of your life. It is, as far as your access goes, the whole of it. The container picture asked how the world got a small light inside it. Look at the balance of what's actually in your possession, and the question starts to sound backwards. But if perception is a rendering, there's a harder question waiting. A rendering is usually a rendering asterisk of asterisk something. Is yours accurate? There's a comfortable assumption underneath everything we've said so far tonight, and it's worth dragging into the light. The assumption is that evolution made our senses roughly truthful. Creatures that saw the world accurately survived. Creatures that didn't walked off cliffs. So our perceptions must approximate reality, however imperfectly. Donald Hoffman, a cognitive scientist at Irvine, spent years running that assumption through evolutionary game theory, and his results pointed the other way. His argument is this: evolution doesn't reward truth, it rewards fitness whatever keeps you alive and reproducing, and truth and fitness are not the same thing. Where they come apart, fitness wins every time, because natural selection doesn't care what you believe, only what you do. In his simulations, organisms tuned to perceive reality accurately were consistently outcompeted by organisms tuned only to perceive fitness-relevant summaries. Accuracy costs energy and time. A useful shortcut beats a truthful picture. His analogy is the desktop on a computer. When you drag a blue rectangle to the trash, nothing blue is moving anywhere, and there is no trash. Underneath is voltage across transistors, a reality you'd need a career to understand, and could not possibly work with directly. The icon is not a lie exactly, it's useful asterisk. It hides the truth in order to let you act. Hoffman's claim is that space, time, and objects may be like that. Not false, but interface, a format your ancestors needed, not a window onto what's there. Now, this is contested, and seriously. Critics argue the mathematics assumes what it sets out to prove, that fitness itself depends on structure in the world, so perception can't be arbitrarily disconnected from it, and that Hoffman's stronger conclusions run far ahead of his models. I don't think he's demonstrated his case, and many careful people think it's simply wrong, but even the weak version does something, because the weak version is barely controversial. Your senses are demonstrably not truth detectors. You cannot see most of the electromagnetic spectrum, hear most of the frequency range, or perceive the scales at which most of the universe operates. You're built for a middle band, objects roughly your size, moving at roughly your speed, at temperatures you survive. Everything outside that band required instruments, and the instruments feed their results back into the same narrow band before you can know them. Here's the loop, and it's the point. We built instruments to escape our limited senses, but every result those instruments produce has to be converted into something a human can see or hear before it counts as a result. A needle moves, a number appears, a color changes on a screen, which means all of physics, every discovery about wavelengths and particles and space-time, arrived through the interface. We have never once received information from outside it. That's not an argument against science. Science is the most reliable method we have, precisely because it keeps checking the interface against itself and catching errors. But it does put a boundary on the whole enterprise that's easy to forget, and it's the same boundary Kant drew, arriving from a completely different direction. So we have the world rendered, colors added, objects delivered as icons, and now one more thing on the list of what's constructed rather than received, and it's the one you'd least expect. The flow of time. You are in the present moment. You always have been. It's the one place you cannot leave. So, how long is it? Not the day, not the hour, the asterisk now asterisk, the piece of time that feels like it's happening rather than remembered or anticipated. Try to measure its edges. You'll find it doesn't have any. It seems to be a moving window with soft sides, and if you try to shrink it to a mathematical instant, it stops resembling anything you experience. A true instant has no duration, and nothing can happen in no duration. Yet you clearly experience motion and melody and the shape of a spoken sentence, all of which need time to be what they are. William James called this the specious present in 1890, specious not meaning false, but meaning it presents itself as a knife edge when it's actually a small stretch, a few hundred milliseconds roughly, in which several moments are held together and delivered as one. You never experience a single instant. You experience a smear presented as a point, and we already know from earlier tonight that the smear is assembled, the slow signals waited for, the gaps sewn shut, the whole thing time-stamped asterisk now asterisk after the fact. Now put that next to what physics says, and things get properly strange. In the equations of physics, at the fundamental level, there is no now. The mathematics describes relations between events. Nothing in it marks one moment as the live one, and almost none of it distinguishes past from future. The laws run the same either way. Einstein went further, showing that simultaneity itself is relative. Whether two distant events happen at the same time depends on how you're moving. There is no universal presence sweeping through the cosmos. When his old friend Michel Besso died, Einstein wrote to the family that the distinction between past, present and future is a stubbornly persistent illusion. He was consoling people, and he was also saying something he took seriously. So here's the position. Physics describes a structure with no flowing now. Experience is asterisk made of asterisk a flowing now, and cannot be had without one. There are careful responses on both sides. Some physicists think the flow will turn out to be recoverable from thermodynamics, the one-way street of increasing disorder giving time a direction. Some think physics is simply incomplete here. Others think the flow is real and the equations are missing it. But notice the shape of the disagreement, because it's the same shape we keep finding. The one feature of time you are absolutely certain of, that it moves, that this is happening now, is the one feature the outside description doesn't contain. Just as colour wasn't in the wavelength, and music wasn't in the pressure wave, and the observer wasn't under Penfield's electrode. Each time, the same pattern. The quality is present and undeniable on the inside, and missing from every account given from the outside. That's now happened often enough tonight that it's stopped looking like a series of separate puzzles. If time's passage is something experience contributes rather than receives, then this moment, this particular soft-edged now, with a voice in it, isn't a slot you're passing through. It's something being made, continuously, wherever awareness is, which is oddly steadying. But there are nights when that making falters, and what remains when it does is the last piece of evidence I want to put in front of you. Sometimes the rendering loosens, not dramatically, not frighteningly, but enough that people notice and try to describe it, and find the language isn't quite there. The most common form has a name, depersonalization. Perhaps half of people experience some version of it briefly, often during exhaustion, stress, or the strange hours after too little sleep. It's ordinary, it passes, and it's not dangerous. What people report is remarkably consistent. Their hands look like objects rather than theirs. Their voice sounds like a recording. The world keeps all its detail but loses a quality that's hard to name, the sense of it mattering, of being asterisk in asterisk it, rather than watching it. The interesting part is what doesn't change. Perception carries on perfectly. Thinking works. Memory works. People in this state give clear, articulate accounts of exactly what's happening to them, which is not something a broken perceiver could do. So what's gone? Not the seeing, not the thinking. Something more like the feeling of ownership, the sense that these experiences belong to somebody, that there's a asterisk me, asterisk they're happening to, which tells us something quietly important. That sense of ownership is a separate ingredient. It can be subtracted while everything else stays intact. It's not the automatic result of having experiences. It's an addition, normally so reliable that you've never once noticed it being applied. There are rarer conditions where this goes further, and I'll describe them gently, because what matters here isn't the clinical detail. In Cotard's syndrome, very rare, usually alongside severe depression and treatable, people report feeling that they do not exist. And the paradox in those reports has fascinated philosophers for a century. Something is present enough to make the report. The experience of absence is still an experience. Someone is there, describing the feeling of not being there. Then anesthesia, where we began. Ask someone what general anesthesia was like, and they say it wasn't like anything. Not darkness, not sleep, not a blank stretch. They describe a seam, counting, and then a voice saying it's over, with the two edges touching. Compare that to dreamless sleep, which leaves a sense of duration. You wake knowing time has gone by. Anesthesia doesn't leave that. There's no gap because a gap needs sides. Now here's what I find genuinely comforting about this, and it's the note I want to end the chapter on. An absence of experience cannot itself be experienced. It has never happened to you, and it never will, because there's nobody there for it to happen to. Every moment you have ever actually lived through has been lit. Whatever else is uncertain, that's a structural fact about experience rather than a consoling belief. The self, then, looks less like a thing you have and more like something continuously offered, ownership added, unity produced, time assembled, color supplied, the whole seamless presentation delivered so smoothly that its manufacture has stayed invisible for your entire life. And when parts of it slip, awareness itself doesn't go. It carries on, reporting the slippage, present the whole time, which is exactly what the inversion would predict. But it's also where the inversion runs into its own worst problem, and I promised we'd face that squarely. Here's the objection that keeps the honest proponents of everything we've discussed awake at night. Suppose experience really is woven into the fabric of things, some minimal inner aspect present all the way down, rather than switched on suddenly at some level of complexity. Fine, now explain you asterisk, because you are not a fog, you're not a crowd of tiny flickers running in parallel, you are one experience, singular, bounded, with a point of view. Right now there's a single field containing this voice, the weight of your body, whatever thought just wandered through. One thing. How do you get one asterisk out of many asterisk? This is called the combination problem, and William James spotted it in 1890, long before the modern debate. His example was simple and devastating. Take a sentence, 12 words, give each word to a different person, so each holds one word in mind. Where's the sentence? Nowhere. 12 people holding 12 words do not add up to one person holding a sentence, no matter how you arrange them or how fast they talk to each other. Experiences don't seem to sum. Two subjects don't merge into a bigger subject. Your left hemisphere and right hemisphere don't obviously combine into a third experiencer, and the split brain work suggests they might not have been combined in the first place. So the inversion trades one impossible-looking problem for another. The standard view has to explain how experience arises from ingredients with none. The inversion has to explain how one experience arises from countless small ones. Neither has managed it. I want to be honest that this objection is strong. Some philosophers think it's fatal, and they may be right. There are attempts at answers. One says the combining goes the other way round, that the universe is fundamentally one experience, and individual minds are formed by asterisk division asterisks rather than assembly. Not many becoming one, but one becoming apparently many. That reframes the problem, but it inherits a new one. Why the divisions fall exactly where they do, and why they feel so complete. Another approach denies that separate small experiences exist to be combined at all, proposing instead that experience is a field, and organisms are localized intensities in it. That has the advantage of matching the whirlpool picture we tried on earlier. It has the disadvantage of being extremely difficult to make precise. So the chapter opens with an admission rather than an argument. We are not standing on solid ground. Nobody is. But notice something about where the difficulty sits. Both frames stumble at the same place, the moment where the many and the one meet. The standard view stumbles going up from parts to experience. The inversion stumbles coming down from the whole to selves. That's suspicious in an interesting way. When two opposite approaches fail at precisely the same junction, the problem may not belong to either of them. It may belong to the assumption they share, that experience is the kind of thing that comes in countable units at all. There's one serious theory that tries to make unity itself measurable. It's worth looking at, along with the trouble it's in. Giulio Tononi took the combination question and made a bold move. Instead of asking what produces consciousness, he asked what consciousness asterisk is asterisk, structurally, and then went looking for that structure in physical systems. His answer, consciousness is integrated information. The theory is called IIT, and it's one of the few in this field that generates real numbers. The idea, stripped of mathematics, is this. A system is conscious to the degree that it is both differentiated and unified, able to be in many possible states, while forming a whole that cannot be split without losing something. Think about your visual field. It has enormous variety. You could be seeing countless different scenes, and it's irreducibly joined. You can't experience the left half and the right half as two separate experiences, no matter how you try. That joining, Tononi says, isn't a side effect. It asterisks is asterisks the consciousness. He assigns it a quantity, phi, measuring how much a system loses when you cut it apart. High phi, a system whose parts genuinely depend on each other. Low phi, a collection that could be separated without loss. The theory makes real predictions, which is rare and admirable here. It predicts that the cerebellum, which has far more neurons than the cortex, contributes almost nothing to consciousness, because its circuitry is arranged in parallel loops that barely interact, and that matches the clinical picture. People born without a cerebellum have coordination difficulties, not absent inner lives. It also predicts that a computer simulating a brain perfectly could have almost no experience, because standard computer architecture is arranged in a way that scores low, however sophisticated the software, and it implies that phi is present, in small amounts, in very simple systems. Tony accepts this. It puts a form of proto-experience surprisingly far down. Now the trouble. In 2023, over 100 researchers signed an open letter calling IIT pseudoscience. That's an unusually aggressive thing for scientists to do about a colleague's theory, and it caused a serious argument. Their objection was largely about testability. Phi is, in practice, effectively impossible to calculate for anything as complex as a brain. The computation explodes beyond any feasible scale, and critics argued that certain inert arrangements of simple components could in principle score very high, which would mean the theory attributes rich experience to things nobody believes are experiencing anything. Defenders replied that this is a feature, not a bug, that a theory should follow its own logic into uncomfortable places, and that unfalsifiability in practice isn't the same as unfalsifiability in principle. I don't think that argument is finished, and I'm not going to pretend to settle it. What's worth carrying forward is subtler than the verdict. IIT is the most rigorous attempt anyone has made to turn this question into mathematics, and it ends up, by its own internal logic, placing something like experience much further down the ladder than intuition allows, while remaining almost impossible to check. Even at its most precise, the question resists, and there's one more place where it resists, in the last field you'd expect to find it. I've been avoiding this, and it's time to approach it carefully, because no topic in science has been more thoroughly abused by people selling things. In quantum mechanics, an unmeasured system is described by a wave function, a mathematical object encoding possibilities. Measure it, and you get one definite result. The mathematics that governs the possibilities is precise, deterministic, and beautifully confirmed. The transition to a single actual outcome is not described by that mathematics at all. This is the measurement problem, and it has been open for 100 years. What it is asterisk, not asterisk, is proof that consciousness creates reality. Let me be blunt, because this claim is everywhere. The word observer in physics means an interaction with a measuring apparatus. A photographic plate is an observer. A dust grain is an observer. Nothing in the standard formalism requires a mind, and most physicists think minds have nothing to do with it. But here's what's true, and it's odd enough without exaggeration. Several of the founders were troubled in this direction, and they weren't fools. Von Neumann analyzed where measurement happens and found the chain could be pushed indefinitely. Apparatus measuring system, eye measuring apparatus, brain measuring eye, with no natural place for it to stop. Wigner, for a period, thought consciousness might be what ended the chain, and later abandoned the view. Pauli corresponded with Jung about it for years. Schrödinger read Vedanta and wrote that the total number of minds might be one. Meanwhile, the mainstream has developed answers that need no mind at all. Decoherence explains beautifully how quantum behavior gets hidden by interaction with an environment. Many worlds says every outcome happens in a branching structure. Pilot wave theory says the particles always had definite positions. Others say the wave function was only ever a bookkeeping device for what an experimenter knows. Every one of these is held by serious physicists. Surveys of practitioners return badly split results, with no interpretation commanding a majority. A century of the most successful theory in history, and no agreement on what it says the world is, and on many worlds specifically, since it comes up whenever people discuss other versions of themselves. It is a mathematical interpretation, not an observation. Nobody has seen another branch. Nobody can. Treating other versions of you as real people living other lives goes well beyond anything the physics supports, and I'd rather leave it as the speculation it is. So what do I actually want you to take from this? Only this, and it's modest. At the foundation of physics there is a genuine, unresolved question about the relationship between what exists and what is observed. That question is not settled in favor of consciousness. It is also not settled against it. The honest position, held by many physicists, is that we have an extraordinary predictive machine and no agreement on what it's telling us about reality, which is a strange thing to have to say about the most tested theory we own, and it fits uncomfortably well with the shape of the whole night. The closer we get to the foundations, the more the observer turns out not to be safely outside the picture. We should talk about the thing that sits underneath all of this, and we'll do it gently, because it's late and the point is not to frighten anyone. Every night, something like a boundary is crossed. You lose the thread. There's no moment of falling asleep that you experience. Nobody has ever caught it, because catching it would mean still being awake. And every morning, something resumes. Here's what's genuinely established. Awareness can be interrupted and return intact. This happens to you nightly. It happens more completely under anesthesia. It happens in certain forms of unconsciousness following injury, from which people have returned after long periods, occasionally with their character and memories recognizably whole. That's the observation. Interruption is not ending. A pause in the report is not evidence about the reporter. Now, what happens at the final boundary? That is beyond the instruments, entirely and permanently. I want to be very careful here, because this is exactly the point where people overreach in both directions. Some will tell you confidently that experience simply stops, full stop, because the brain stops. That's an interpretation. It's a reasonable one under the standard frame, and it may be right, but it is not an observation, because no observation from that side has ever been made. Nobody has measured absence from within. Others will tell you confidently that consciousness carries on in some particular described fashion, with details. That's also an interpretation, and it also exceeds the evidence. There's research in this area that's worth knowing about without overclaiming. Careful studies of cardiac arrest survivors have documented experiences reported from periods when brain activity was severely compromised. Some researchers find this significant. Others point out that the timing of such reports is very hard to establish, and that the brain does unusual things at boundaries. Both are being reasonable. The work continues, and nothing is settled. And in 2022, doctors recording a patient's brain during an unexpected cardiac arrest captured activity in the moments around it that resembled patterns associated with memory retrieval. One study, one patient, not a conclusion. It was widely reported as evidence of a life flashing past. It isn't evidence of that. It's a single striking recording that raises a question. So here's what can honestly be said, and it's less than people want and more than nothing. Science observes the body. It observes the brain with remarkable precision. It observes the correlations between the two and experience, and those correlations are strong and real. What the self ultimately is, and where it goes, is not a question the instruments are shaped to reach. Not now, and quite possibly not ever, for the same reason Nagel gave about the bat. Whatever you believe about that, it isn't contradicted by anything here. This whole night has been about the limits of an outside view, and those limits leave a great deal open, deliberately and honestly. What I'd offer instead of an answer is the observation we started with. Every moment you have lived has been lit. You have no experience of absence, and the reason is structural rather than sentimental. Whatever else the dark is, you've never actually been in it. Let me draw the shape of the problem one last time, because it's more elegant than any of the answers. Everything humanity knows, it knows from outside. That's the design. You look at a thing, you measure it, you compare notes with others who looked, and the agreement between you is what makes the finding trustworthy. Objectivity means it doesn't depend on being you. That method has been staggeringly successful. It found the age of the universe, the structure of the genome, the chemistry of stars, from inside one species on one small planet, working with borrowed light and careful arithmetic, and it has exactly one blind spot. Consciousness is the only thing that is asterisk made of asterisk being on the inside. Its whole nature is that it is from somewhere. So the method that requires removing the point of view cannot get at the one phenomenon that is nothing but point of view. Not because we're not clever enough, because of the geometry of the two things. There's a symmetry here worth sitting with. The most certain thing you have is the least demonstrable. You cannot prove to me that you're conscious. I can't prove it to you, and neither of us has ever seriously doubted it about ourselves. Not for a moment, not once, in a whole life. Certainty and evidence, in this one case, point in opposite directions. That's not a defeat. It's a report on the shape of the situation, and I think knowing the shape is worth more than a false resolution. It also means something about how to hold all of this. Every frame we've looked at tonight, the standard emergent view, the inversion, integrated information, the interface, the various readings of quantum measurement, is a way of pointing. None of them is the thing. The one who is going to check has never been available for inspection, and there's something else that follows, which is easy to miss and worth more than it looks. If the question can't be closed from the outside, then nobody gets to close it for you. Not a physicist, not a philosopher, not a voice in the dark at whatever hour this is. The territory stays open, not out of politeness, but because that's genuinely where the evidence leaves it. Mystery, in this case, isn't a gap waiting to be filled by better equipment. It's a permanent feature of a universe that contains at least one thing that can only be known from within. You are that thing, right now, effortlessly, without having done anything to deserve it or maintain it. And that's where the arguing ends, and something quieter can begin. So let's set the arguments down. We began with a man on a table, counting backwards, the lamp still lit and the light gone. We went looking for the seat, and never found it. We watched unity survive a brain cut in two, and the present moment arrive late, and the boundary of the body redraw itself around a rubber hand. Then the turn, not a light inside a container, but something the container appears within. We've held that loosely, and we should keep holding it loosely. It isn't proven, its problems are real. The standard view may be right after all, and if it is, most of what we noticed tonight is still true. The seat is still unfound, the seam still invisible, the colours still added. What changes, either way, is the grammar. You've spent your life saying asterisk, my asterisk consciousness, my awareness, as though it were an item in your possession, kept somewhere, maintained by you, at risk if you let go. But you didn't acquire it. You've never once turned it on. You have no memory of the first moment of it, and no experience of any moment without it. It was simply the situation, already underway, every time you've ever checked. That doesn't sound like an item. It sounds like a place, and places don't need holding. A room doesn't require its occupant's effort to remain a room. You can put your weight down in one. Whatever consciousness turns out to be, a product of tissue, a feature of the fabric, or something no one has thought of yet, it is not something you are currently doing, which means it's not something you can fail at tonight. There's a loneliness particular to late hours, and it usually takes a specific shape. It's the sense of being sealed, everyone else out there in their own boxes, and you in yours, and between you only the imperfect business of language, never quite carrying what you meant, never quite letting anyone in. Nagel's bat made that seem worse. You've never verified another mind, not once. But look at what else that means. Every person you have ever loved has been in exactly the same position, reaching, inferring, never able to check, and doing it anyway, constantly, warmly, without noticing they were doing anything remarkable at all. That reaching has built every friendship, every family, every conversation that ever mattered. It has never once been verified, and it has never once needed to be. And if the inversion holds even a little, the ceiling looks different again. Whirlpools appear separate from above. Underneath, there's only the river. The boundaries would be real where you live, and provisional where they come from, which is a very particular kind of alone. I won't tell you what to feel about that. It isn't a conclusion, and it isn't advice. Only this, as an observation. Right now, somewhere, other people are awake in the dark with minds that won't switch off, turning over the same questions in different words. That isn't proof of anything either, but it does mean the thinking you're doing tonight is not happening in a sealed room. It's happening in something much larger and much older that has been going on for a very long time without asking anyone's permission. There's a particular exhaustion in needing to know. It's the thing that keeps the mind circling at 2 a.m, not the questions themselves, but the sense that they have to be settled before anything can rest, as though sleep were waiting on a verdict. Notice that the oldest, most careful minds we've met tonight didn't have that verdict either. Penfield, after 40 years with his hands near the exposed surface of human awareness, ended by admitting he hadn't found what he was looking for. Nagel drew a limit and left it standing. Chalmers named the problem rather than solving it. The physicists have argued for 100 years and haven't converged. None of them stopped living well inside the not knowing. Several of them seem to find it the most interesting part. There's something worth borrowing there. An open question isn't a debt. It doesn't accumulate. You're not falling behind by failing to resolve tonight what nobody has resolved in 3,000 years. And consider what a closed answer would actually cost. If someone handed you a complete account of what you are, finished, verified, nothing further to wonder about, I'm not sure the world would feel better. Something would have gone quiet in it. The wondering isn't the problem. The wondering may be one of the better things you do. So you can let the question stay open. It's been open a long time. It was open before you were here to hold it, and it will be open after. And it has never once required anyone in particular to keep it that way. You can set it down now. It isn't going anywhere. The room you're in is still here. The weight of you is still resting on whatever is holding it. Notice the breath without changing it. It's been going all night, all day, all your life, entirely without your supervision. It doesn't wait for permission. It never has. And underneath that, quieter still, the light that has been on this whole time, through every thought in this conversation, through the ones that wandered off and came back. It didn't need your attention to continue. It was there before you started listening. Nothing here needs deciding tonight. The seat was never found, and you're fine. The moment arrives late, and you've never missed it. The colours are added, and they're still beautiful. The question stays open, and the openness is not a weight. You are not holding the light. That was never the arrangement. Whatever awareness turns out to be, inside you, around you, or something with no asterisk inside asterisk about it at all, it doesn't run on your effort. It carries on while you sleep. It has done every night of your life, and it will tonight. So let the thinking slow. Let it drift wherever it's going. Let the room hold you. There is nothing to keep watch over, nothing to work out. Only this, soft and lit and continuing without you. Rest now.